Joe Rogan, one of the most influential voices in the country, hears the parable of the sower and then 3 days later has a biblical scholar on that shares the gospel. What does this mean? Hey, welcome back to Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, educator in Los Angeles, bringing viewpoint diversity to everything out on the interwebs. And this is an interesting one. So Joe Rogan, who has a very powerful voice. I mean, him bringing Trump on and Kamala not going on his show may have actually influenced the United States election, presidential election. Okay, so I've done a lot talking before. I've done a podcast on how Joe Rogan is just a passionately curious person. He kind of follows the Socratic method. He's very, very curious. And being curious is in conflict with certainty. Okay, you can't be certain and be curious. You know, those things are often in conflict. So he's a very curious person. And he used to say that Christianity is just nonsense. I mean, you go back just even like 5 years ago, okay? But moving to Texas, being around a lot more Christians, and also people in his circle like Jordan Peterson bringing up the idea that like maybe this isn't all nonsense, has started to open his mind up more. And because he is a searcher, because he is curious, he is actually listening. So he's had people on like Stephen C. Meyer, which is a great podcast. And you know, Stephen C. Meyer broke down the logical reasoning for God. But then he brought on Wes Huff. Wes Huff is a brilliant guy, my goodness, okay, who really understands the historical context of Jesus and the Gospels and runs Apologetics Canada. I mean, he's a really top-notch apologetics teacher. And in this, Joe Rogan talks to Wes Huff, but what's really interesting is about 3 or 4 episodes before he had Wes Huff on, he had his friend Duncan Trussell on, a stand-up comedian. And Duncan Trussell brings up the parable of the sower. Now, he gets a little wrong. He's like, what if this is aliens and blah, 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 blah. But here's what it looked like when Duncan Trussell brought up the parable of the sower.
Yeah, the parable of the sower.
Whoa.
Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. And then, where is it? Then he told, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path and the birds ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear.
Whoa. Listen to this. The disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" He replied, "Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables." I'd be like, bro, what the fuck did you just say? Can you break that down? If I had that guy on the podcast, if I had God on the podcast, I'm like, okay, do you have friends? Okay, when you talk to friends, like when you say like complicated things, you should make them make sense. So I know you're smart. You made the whole universe. I'm not being disrespectful, sir. But what did you just say? Because we teach kids that way, kind of. We kind of teach kids almost in parables.
Well,
we teach kids like a simplistic form of everything.
Well, I think it's an acknowledgement of a kind of spectrum of intelligence, right? It's like,
right.
The idea is like, let me give you a little data fractal here.
That's why it's so rude when someone talks down to you.
Oh, the worst.
Okay, so for those of you that don't know, the parable of the sower is about the people who, sowing seeds. It's like, planting seeds. Okay. And there's, you can plant seeds in all different kinds of ground. You can plant it on rock and it's going to get scorched up by the sun. You can plant it in on shallow soil. Okay. And then the thorns will take it over and it's not going to work. So it's all these different ways that you can plant seeds and the seeds won't thrive. Okay. The seeds is the word of God. It's the gospel. It's a story of Jesus and how you can apply it in your life. And people can hear it. People know about Jesus. People hear the stories of Jesus. It's just sometimes it just doesn't register for them for a whole bunch of different reasons. And it's really interesting that was brought up. And then very soon after, Wes Huff comes on and then shares the reality of the story of Jesus and the historical context, more specifically, of Jesus. One thing that gets in the way of Joe Rogan, I think, is just it's too hard for him to take that leap of faith, okay, to believe in the things that are, by definition, unbelievable, that are not naturalistic and things. But Wes Huff is very, very calm, cool, collected. He's not condescending at all about this. And he brings up, truths like, well, we accept, the biography of Caesar Tiberius, and yet there's more eyewitness testimony and credible historical evidence for Jesus than there is even Tiberius, which is, not nothing. But I've talked a lot about faith. The idea of faith is we all have faith in different things. You have faith when you go through a green light that someone's going to obey traffic lights and not blow through a red light and crash into you. You have faith that the floor is going to hold you up, and the civil engineers that made the building that you're in and things like that. So we always have faith. Not always just rooted in evidence. You didn't see the blueprints. You weren't there when that stuff was built. You don't know that the controllers down, who are controlling the traffic lights aren't going to mess that up. We have to have faith, because if we don't, we're going to go through the world with so much anxiety of all the things that could possibly go wrong. So we have to kind of fill in those gaps with things are going to work out. That's kind of the way that we have to function in order to function, So I think Joe is very aware of his position of power. He knows how powerful his voice is. So one of the reasons I suspect why he won't just jump in, just jump in and get baptized or whatever. I think also for Jordan Peterson too. I think one of the reasons they don't just jump in, don't just cross the line, as Wes Huff says in this podcast, is because he knows that people will be all over him for that in one way or the other, that it's going to have a massive impact, and he doesn't want to steer people down the wrong way. He grew up very, very critical of the church, and it's understandable. So he's trying to make sure all his ducks are in a row before he would ever make a massive life decision, because when you choose to give your life over to Jesus, it's the biggest decision you will ever make. So you don't want to make it lightly. You don't want to make it lightly. And I think that there's a real problem with a lot of churches that say this is just do it. That dogmatism element that people like Sam Harris don't like about religion. And I tend to lean towards people like Wes Huff and many others who say no, that's not the way it should be. Timothy Keller says no, you should question things, ask questions, ask a lot of questions, because then you can get there on your own terms. And that's when it's going to be real. You don't want to put a gun to someone's head and say you have to make the most important decision of your life. That goes against everything that faith is all about. That goes against everything about what God's love is, which is it has to be a choice. It has to be a conscious choice. And in order for you to make a good choice, you have to know what your options are. You have to be informed. So I think it was really cool the way that Wes Huff came on and informed him about this. So in this clip I'm going to show you is Wes Huff just openly asks him. He said, what are your thoughts on Jesus? So here's what he says.
What do you think of Jesus? In terms of your own, journeying and trying to find answers to ultimate questions. What do you think of the historical person of Jesus?
Well, it certainly seems like there's a lot of people that believe that there was this very exceptional human being that existed. So the question is, what does that mean? Does it mean he was the Son of God? Does it mean he was just some completely unique human being that had this vision of humanity and this way of educating people and spreading this ideology that would ultimately change the way human beings interact with each other forever? So what is he the Son of God? Well, are we all? That's another question, right? Do we all have that inside of us? Do we all have that ability to change everything around us inside of us? Do we all have that unique connection to the divine? And is he a representation of the best version of that? Or was he an actual person that was the Son of God? And is it important?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, what does it mean? It's just the fact that it's a question to ponder is a miracle in itself, in a way. Just the fact that there's this concept of this person that died for our sins, that's the Son of God, But you have to buy you have to believe in a bunch of stuff to go that way. Like, just the concept of that is interesting to people, because what it can do to people is offer them a very unique way to change the way they feel about the world itself. And if you do follow that, I know a lot of Christians are hardcore Christians. They're some of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. So it does work. Right? Like, if you do live like a Christian and you do follow the principles of Christ, you will have a richer, more love-filled life. So it is true, right? But you have to submit to this concept that this guy was the child of God who came down to earth, let himself be crucified, came back from the dead, explained a bunch of stuff for people, and then said, all right, see you when I come back.
And you don't know how you can wrap your head around that.
Right.
So in that clip, one of the things that I think we need to, look at is Joe is still aligning Christianity with other religions and kind of moral guidebooks of like, it gives you some standing on how you should live. I talk about that a lot. I say Jesus is like a role model. So it's like an A+. So if I give a project here, you have to do a book report. This is an A+++. You're not going to be able to get it, but like aim for this. It tells you how to act. And there are elements of Christianity that absolutely does that, for sure. But where Christianity is different than other religions is it's not merely a moral guidebook, because the reality is you're never going to meet the standard that God has. You're just not. And you're never going to be able to meet it. So therefore, you need something else. You need a savior. So that's where it's different. It's not just a moral guidebook. You're going to scroll. It's recognizing that you are not going to be moral. So what now? There's a guy who goes out, he's like a street evangelist named Ray Comfort. And one of the things he does, he goes up to people and he says, are you a good person? And they say, yeah, because everyone thinks they're a good person. Even Adolf Hitler, I'm sure, thought that he was a good person. The person that, if you say, if there's anyone in hell, who would it be? They go, Adolf Hitler, right? But like, did Adolf Hitler think that? Everywhere Adolf Hitler went, it was smiling faces, crying, oh my gosh, thank you so much for getting us out of this hyperinflation. Thank you so much for getting food on the table for my children, all of these kinds of things. So why would Hitler think he's the one person that people 80 years later would say is going to hell? That wouldn't make sense. Right? So what Ray Comfort does is he says, are you a good person? And people say yes. And then he says things like, well, have you lied? Yeah. Have you cheated? Yeah. Have you stolen? Yes. Have you lusted? Yeah. Have you used God's name in vain? Yes. Okay. You've done all these things. So he says, something along the lines of like, so by your definition, you are a lying, thieving, cheating, blah, 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 blah. Okay. What's the penalty for that? Like, what's the cost? You, by your definition, did all these things wrong. So what's the penalty for that? Because we believe in justice. That's written on our heart. The idea of justice is written on our hearts. So if you do something wrong, there needs to be a penalty for that. That's the way the justice system is structured. That's the way morality in general is structured. You do good things happen. You do bad things happen. So you've done all these bad things. So what's the penalty for that? And that's how he starts it. And then, a metaphor would be like, take the worst thing you've ever done. Okay, whatever it was. Maybe you drove drunk. Maybe you've hurt people. Maybe you beat someone up. Maybe you've done something really terrible. Okay, let's say that justice was served in that way, and you were arrested for the worst thing you've ever done. You go in front of the judge. The judge says you're facing prison time. Maybe you've done something in your life. I've done stuff in my life that probably, if I was caught and they threw the book at me, I would do prison time. Okay, so if that's the case, justice would be actually served, you should be doing prison time. Okay? So you go up in front of the judge, says, all right, you're headed for prison for 3 years. Okay? As he's about to bring the gavel down, someone walks in who's completely innocent, did not do the things that you did, and says, I'll take the prison time. Don't worry about it. You can walk free. You don't have to lose your job. You don't have to lose respect of your peers. You don't have to lose all kinds of future opportunities because you're a jailbird now. I'll take it. I'll take all of that for you. Walk free. Okay. Well, what can I do for you? Wow, thank you. What can I do for you? Just acknowledge it. Just acknowledge it. Just say, you did this for me. sincerely, thank you. You took my penalty. You did it. Thank you. That's it. That's all I want you to do for me. You know, that's the gospel. That's the gospel. Is that Jesus took all of the sin, felt the wrath of God, of justice, of all the things that you and I have done that are bad. He took the penalty for all of that all at once. Horrible torture, horrible, ridicule and skin ripped from his bones from being flogged and wrapped in the embarrassing purple robe and strung up on the cross and crown of thorns and killed in front of his mother and betrayed and all of the worst things that can happen. As Jordan Peterson says, it's a limit story. It's like the worst thing can happen to the best person. Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, the worst thing happened to the best person. So it's kind of like the structure, I don't know. But if you're saying that you're a good person and bad things are happening to you, are you better than Jesus? Is what's happening to you worse than what happened to Jesus? There's layers of this. But that's the story. That's the story. And, sharing that with Joe, I think is really important. I do believe that Joe is a searcher. I do. I think that he is looking for things. That's why he's into psychedelics. That's why he, brings on all these different people. That's why he's so curious. I think he's going to continue to search. And Matthew 7:7 says, seek and you will find. I do think that if you keep seeking, you keep pulling on that thread, you will find it. That's how I found it. It was reading atheist books. It was watching a lot of debates and just pulling on the thread of curiosity. There's a lot of people that sought to prove it wrong. C.S. Lewis was like, I'm going to disprove this whole Christianity thing. And he kept getting curious, kept pulling a thread, and then he fell into being an evangelical Christian. I think that that's the future for Joe if he keeps being curious about this. He keeps looking at evidence. No proof. There's no proof of anything. There's just evidence. You go with the evidence. Where does the evidence lie? Francis Collins went into the Human Genome Project, knows more about genetics than anybody, basically. Okay, he went into the Human Genome Project as an atheist, looked at the DNA structure, and said, this was designed, clearly. Okay, so now it's intelligent design, kept pulling the thread of intelligent design, came out an evangelical Christian. Okay, so if you want to get really curious, there's evidence to point you in a certain direction. You can start with the Big Bang. That's one miracle they discussed in the podcast. There's one miracle. Okay, so if there's one miracle, can there be two? Can there be three? Can there be four? No, what is it? Okay, keep on that thread. I think you will find it. I love this stuff. I love it because I'm always seeking truth. I don't know what truth is, but I believe that the best evidence of truth would be within the Bible. I think it's held up. I think when Jesus says he's the way, the truth, the life, I believe him. And so what does that mean? You can talk about that forever. Biblical scholars have been talking about that forever. But this is something that I think is really important, that if you are seeking truth, dive in, learn the evidence, get into it. I'm going to be hosting a masterclass on this called Christian Curious. I am not a theologian, but I'm here to have conversations and work out these things. So if you want to join that, I'll put the link in the bio at the bottom of the podcast in the show notes. Also, my church, Freedom Church, is doing an apologetics course that I'm helping to facilitate, and I'll put that link as well. Okay, it's for Freedom Bible College, and there's a whole apologetics course that's hosted by Dr. Mark Clark, Pastor Mark Clark. That's really, really good. He's also another brilliant guy who knows the philosophy and the science better than I do. I just look at really smart people and I kind of take what they do and kind of translate it to people in a simple way. But I highly advise you just to get curious. I'm not saying don't learn philosophy. I'm not saying don't learn science. I think you should learn it all. Learn it all. But when it comes down to this one thing, learn that too. So I'm very curious of your thoughts on this. I thought it was a great podcast, really, really interesting, and I wanted to share that. So thank you so much for watching. Take care.